most important thing, they're taking care of the farm fields. And so, like I said, there were about 32 tribes in the Powhatan chiefdom, and approximately, or about 14 to 30,000 people. And so what's coming from those farm fields is 50 to 70% of their diet. It's feeding thousands of people. But with that, do you guys have any questions for me?
How did we kill it here today? We didn't go out. Get a bow and arrow out. Clothing, you could be punished severely. If you're caught dumping foul water, old soapy laundry water, within the confines of the palisade, you could be whipped. The mildest form of punishment would be to deny your rations for a day. Loss of entertainment, not attending church service. You could be, you could lose your rations for a day for not going to church. Church was a morning prayer service and evening vespers every day. Now, some days you might be on guard duty. Everyone's going to be trained as a soldier with the exception of bakers. Bakers would spend a lot of time with an oven like this, called a clome oven or a Devon oven. Clome is an old English term for clay. And as a baker, if you're caught using any dishonest means to say make the bread way heavier, like it gets you adding sawdust to the flour, you risk the pain for the first offense of losing
your ear.
Yes, first offense.
Wow.
It's a pretty stiff penalty.
That was definitely not punchy either.
Thank you, ladies, for.
But you want to make sure that it's totally soaked, because I had a colleague once eat a piece of meat that was only soaked for 10 hours, and he didn't know that, and he sliced it up, cooked it, and the end of his tongue blistered really badly, and he could only taste salt for 2 days. So it's not fun, but it's a really good way of preserving your meat. So once all the water's taken out of it, it can stay good almost indefinitely. So that's going to be one of the main ways of preserving things. Another way they're going to preserve stuff is by pickling it. So I'm not going to tilt it over because it's full of like pickles and water, like vinegar and stuff. But that is a jar full of pickles. So back then, what we think of today as pickles is just like cucumbers that have been pickled. Back then, pickles could be anything because they pickle almost every single vegetable. They pickle a lot of different kinds of fruits. Most meats could be pickled, and if they could do it, then they were going to. They really liked vinegar a lot. We're not quite sure why. They had it in a lot of different foods that personally I don't think should have had vinegar in them, such as sweet potato and apple pie. They put like a quarter cup of white wine vinegar. We're like, no, please don't do that, because you only taste vinegar. It's not good.
Where do they get vinegar?
They would get, oh, that's a good question actually. I'm not quite sure how vinegar is made, but the settlers here at Jamestown would have vinegar shipped in from England.
They didn't make it.
No, they wouldn't make their own here. But yeah, most of the stuff they are eating is actually going to be shipped in from England. Supply ships come about every 3 months. depending on whether or not they got hit by a storm or sunk or things like that. So it's not super reliable, but they're going to be getting a whole lot of their food source from England. Until 1620s or 30s, they're very dependent on them, especially for food. And then they're actually going to stay dependent from manufactured goods up until the American Revolution, when we separate from England. But, yeah. And then also they're going to be eating seafood from the river, so not a whole lot of actual fish, but shellfish, so clams, crabs, and oysters. They wouldn't be eating a whole lot of fish because the men here at Jamestown didn't actually know how to fish for the most part. Back in England, fishing is a gentleman's sport, and it's actually the same idea with hunting. So hunting and fishing are both gentlemen's sports back in England. And that means only rich people did it. There aren't that many rich people here, and if there are here, then they're going to be in charge of like administration and running the fort. So they're not going to have time to go out and fish or hunt. So the poorer people here are not going to be doing a whole lot of fishing, and mostly because they just really didn't know how to. There's reports of one man trying to catch a sturgeon with a frying pan. So just for a little perspective, a sturgeon is a 10 to 15 foot long fish, and a frying pan is about this big. So that's what we think actually. We think he was trying to knock it out. Maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
They swim shallow, and at one point in the waters here, they were so plentiful you could see them.
Right, yeah, it's true. You could see them, so maybe he could have tried to hit it from the boat.
At certain times of the year, they migrate and they do things, so yeah.
Yeah, it was a strange story.
So no interaction with natives,
They actually would have had a fair amount of interaction with the natives.
but not fishing.
Not to learn how to do it.
Not, well, eventually they learn how to fish from the natives. They're gonna...
We will go to Williamsburg. 1, 2.
What you making?
I'm making bale ears for these kettles here.
Oh, okay.
So when y'all do get over, the differences, the main difference is the bellows.
Okay.
Their bellows are going to be up in the rafters, and the air comes down the side of the hearth, underneath and up from below.
Okay.
All right, so there's a bottom blast, this is a side blast.
Okay.
The other main difference will be the advent of what's known as a London anvil. So it's a block with a step down on the horn off the side.
Right. Okay.
That's what Wiley Caddy's buying up.
Because Mount Vernon had, it looked like...
Good, fire.
What did he shoot?
There you go.
What did he shoot?
That was a single shot from what's called a matchlock weapon. It's called matchlock because it uses a burning piece of match to ignite fire the weapon. The idea behind it is super simple. If you take a burning piece of rope and you stick it into a pile of gunpowder, what usually happens?
It's light. It ignites from fire.
Exactly. That's exactly what's happening here. So that burning piece of rope in question is what we call match, which is hemp cord that's pulled in gunpowder and lye for 3 or 4 hours, and when all said and done, it burns very slowly at somewhere around 700 degrees Fahrenheit, which is more than enough to ignite gunpowder. And that pile of gunpowder is sitting in what's called the can of the weapon, which is this part right here. Essentially, you take your burning piece of match, set it into what's called the serpentine, which is this part of the weapon right here, and when you pull the trigger, the serpentine brings that burning piece of match right down on top of that pile of gunpowder and sets it off. The powder will then travel through a little hole on the side of the barrel called a vent hole and ignite more powder that's sitting inside of the barrel behind the musket ball, and that's what sends the musket ball out of the barrel at about 1,000 feet per second. So, it's a very simple weapon, right? There's not that many moving parts on matchlock weapons like this. In fact, I'll go ahead and show you all of the moving parts. You ready? That's it. That's all of the moving parts right here. Right? That's good for a couple of reasons. One, there's not much that can go wrong, right? And even if something does go wrong, it's gonna be really easy to figure out what's gone wrong and fix it. And two, it's super easy to use. I guarantee that I can hand this to any one of you guys and have you trained in the loading and firing procedure over the course of a couple of hours, and you really master handling the weapon safely, efficiently, and in formation over the course of a couple of weeks, which really isn't a long time, right? This weapon has an effective range of 80 to 100 yards, which means as an average musketeer, you're expected to be able to hit and take down a man-sized target at around a football field's length away, which is decent range if you stop and think about it, right? The Powhatan bow, for example, only has a maximum effective range of 40 to 60 yards, which means weapons like this outrange that by over twice as much. That gives the English an advantage right there. Now it does take 20 to 30 seconds for your average musketeer to load and fire a single shot from this weapon, which is definitely a long time, right? Especially considering a Powhatan warrior should be able to get off 5 to 6 arrows in that same amount of time. However, musketeers should never travel alone. If they're in a team of even, well, like 10 other musketeers, and they can all load and fire their muskets in that 20 to 30 second time range, they should be able to get off a volley every 5 to 6 seconds, which means not just one guy shooting, but multiple men are shooting all at the same time. What it comes down to is as long as you know what you're doing and the guy next to you in formation knows what he's doing, you could turn this into a very deadly and effective weapon. Everything you need to do so is on this belt here called a bandolier. Each of these little wooden bottles is called a charger and holds 1 shot with the gunpowder. Pre-measured for your specific weapon, so before you even get on the battlefield. So when you're on the battlefield, you're trying to reload your weapon, all you have to worry about doing is popping the top open and pouring it right down the barrel, and that's it, right? The actual shot itself is in this little pouch on the side, so those solid lead musket balls are in this little pouch on the side here. Once again, ready to go, just pull it right out of the pouch and throw it down the barrel. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and quickly run through the loading process while loading up black powder, so I can fire it off one last time for you guys. But one thing first, I'm actually not going to be using my chargers today. I'm going to go and stick to paper cartridges because it is a little bit safer than lining my entire body with explosives. And I'm also not going to be putting a solid lead ball down the barrel as well. I'm just going to stick to powder and paper because safety reasons again. So first things first, you got to put that pile of gunpowder I was talking about in the pan. So you'll fill that pan up about halfway with powder. You're going to shut the pan, blow it off, actually flip the weapon over here. Also make sure there's no loose bits of gunpowder on top. This might set off the weapon early. At this point, you're going to take one of your chargers. You'll pour the entire thing down the barrel. You're going to take 1 shot, throw that down the barrel as well. Draw your scouring stick. Ram it all down so it's packed nice and tight at the bottom of the barrel. Return your scouring stick. Bring the weapon up. Separate the matching weapons so they aren't tangled. Take one end of your match. Set it into the serpentine. Test the serpentine to make sure it's actually bringing that match right down on top of that powder. And at this point, you're loaded and ready to fire. So the final 2 commands would be present your piece, which basically means aim, and you'd open your pan, exposing that pile of gunpowder to the match. And of course, the final command is fire, and you pull the trigger and fire your weapon. Right. So at this point, once again, if you aren't fond of loud noises, you might have to go ahead and cover your ears because it is going to be a little bit loud. Right? Present your piece.
Cover your ears.
Give fire. And that's going to wrap up this musket demonstration. If you have any further questions, you're welcome to join me in the guardhouse, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. If not, you guys enjoy the rest of your day.
A couple common items that you see here and a couple special ones. So the glass and the copper that you see any of us wearing out here and that you would have seen any Powhatan wearing back then, those are the social status items. The copper coming from as far away as the Great Lakes region, so we know that there is an established trade network, extensive trade network, that already exists over here long before any Europeans. But the glass beads that you see, those would come from Europeans because they had the actual means to make glass. So, and they had social status, they had a social hierarchy in their society, so really kind of the more glass that you would see someone wearing, or the more copper or bigger pieces of copper that you see someone wearing, you could kind of tell how high up they were. Things like freshwater pearls would actually be very common in this part of Virginia, right here on the James River, Chesapeake Bay, right by the Atlantic Ocean. So things like pearls and different types of shell, those would all be, pretty easy access for them, and you can see all different types of shell beads being made too. You'll see bones and different animal parts being used too. What about the claw? The claw, yeah, this would be definitely something, especially you. You'd be wearing this as a boy. Well, the boys and the men, you're the hunters, you're the warriors, you're the fishermen. You see a guy walking around with a big necklace full of bear teeth and bear claws. What does that tell you about them?
They fight a lot of bears.
They fight a lot of bears, which means, one, they're probably pretty skilled, and they're probably pretty brave. too.
Ooh, they're over the bow if they took it out from long range.
Yeah, there you go.
You don't get so far on range with a bow.
Exactly.
Like I said, they've been in there on days 95, but the heat index is 105. But he said when you go in there, it keeps it drier.
But it's going to penetrate a whole lot better. English mentioned on one occasion, one of them who writes about Powhatan archery ability and says that I imagine they're the best in the world. He mentions in that account that they shot an arrow I saw right through our man's chest. So one of those little thin bone points would do just that if you're close.
You have all kinds of different sizes.
It's the foot of a bird that crushes and eats chickens.
Close enough. Sorry, these are foot.
That's the foot of a red-tailed hawk. From here.
And thinner. And thinner.
Yep. Just the idea with the small. So a whole lot of prep time goes into their training. No school bus, no math class, no field trips. You learn how to hunt, fish, and fight if you're a boy, unless you're being funneled into being a priest, in which case that stuff's not all that important to you.
Doesn't seem very stretchy, but
That's because it's unstrung. So when the bow is not being shot, you leave it like this. You pop the string off the top and slide it down so that the wood can rest. When you string it, what generates the power is the fact that the wood wants to be straight. But you're forcing it backwards and putting a string over it, and so when you pull it even further and further, there's a whole lot of stored up energy in that wood, and when I release the string, it shoots the arrow because of that. If I leave it strung for a long, long time, eventually it will get weaker and weaker.
like these little notches when you're preparing the shoe.
Yep, you bend the bow over your knee and slide the string over. Similar idea on a much lesser scale if you were to walk up ahead of your friend or sibling or whatever and take a tree branch, pull it back, wait for them to walk by and let it go. But if you hold that there for long enough, let's say hours, days, weeks, months, years, eventually you let go of that tree branch, it just is that shape. Has a memory.
Can you tell me if that's straight on the chance?
Yeah. You can do that now. What you need? The one here?
Yeah, the foot.